I was signing the last page of a contract worth more than the entire street I grew up on when my phone buzzed. A single image filled the screen. My family, crowded around the long oak table in the dining room of the old farmhouse. Turkey, cranberry sauce, pies lined up like trophies. Everyone smiling. Everyone except me. It wasn't a mistake. They knew how to reach me. They just didn't want to. I leaned back in my leather chair, the buttery smooth surface creasing softly against my silk blouse. Outside my office window, Manhattan stretched out in a blur of twinkling lights and November mist. Somewhere far away, the smell of cinnamon tea curled up from the cup on my desk, mixing with a faint tang of fresh printer ink. For a second, just a second, I felt the old sting. The one I used to swallow down at 19 when I realized family didn't always mean unconditional. My thumb hovered over the photo, ready to delete it like I always did. But then I noticed something in the background. The window behind my father's chair. The familiar slope of the hill. The barn's red paint, faded to pink in the sunlight. They were eating on my land. They didn't know it yet. I smiled, slow, deliberate, the way you do when you're holding the winning card and nobody at the table has caught on. "Enjoy dinner," I murmured to no one, slipping my phone into my purse. I had business to attend to. The last time I stood in that dining room, the air was thick with the smell of roasted turkey and unspoken judgment. I was 22, broke, and fresh out of college with nothing but a part-time barista job and a head full of plans nobody cared to hear about. "Rachel," my mother had said, her voice clipped as she set down a basket of rolls. "We just don't think it's a good idea for you to be here this year. Not with the everything going on." Everything going on. That was her polite umbrella term for me quitting the corporate internship my uncle had pulled strings to get me and announcing I was starting my own business instead. My father didn't even look up from carving the turkey. "It's not a stable path," he muttered. "You need to learn to be realistic before you come back here." My fingers curled into the hem of my cardigan. "Realistic," I repeated, the word bitter on my tongue. "You mean obedient." There was a pause, a few coughs from cousins trying to pretend they weren't listening. My aunt's silver bracelet jingled as she reached for the mashed potatoes, like even the sound was trying to fill the silence. I'd come to that dinner clinging to the hope that they'd see me, believe in me. Instead, they pushed me out before dessert. My mother walked me to the porch, her eyes darting to the neighbors' houses like she was afraid they'd see the scandal of her daughter. On the steps, my grandmother pressed something into my palm, a brass key on a faded red ribbon. "This was for the shed out back," she whispered. "But I want you to think of it as a reminder. If they close the door, Rachel, build your own house. You hear me?" The key was warm from her hand, heavier than it should have been. I nodded, swallowing the lump that had been building since I walked through the door. When I drove away that night, my headlights carved a path through the cold November dark, the old barn disappearing in the rearview mirror. I didn't know where I was headed, not exactly. But I knew I wasn't coming back, not until I could do it on my terms. The first winter away from home was the kind of cold that made your teeth ache. I rented a tiny studio in Philadelphia, cracked radiator, single window that whistled in the wind, and worked mornings at a bakery, nights waiting tables. The brass key from Grandma sat on my dresser, its ribbon fraying, catching the morning light like it was reminding me not to quit. My business idea was simple in theory and impossible in practice, a boutique catering service specializing in locally sourced, seasonal menus. It sounded glamorous when I explained it to strangers. In reality, it meant chasing suppliers at 5 a.m., burning through my savings on permits, and begging friends to taste test recipes until they were sick of roasted squash. I met my first real break in the form of Evelyn Carter, a 70-year-old retired chef with the sharpest palate and the kindest eyes I'd ever known. She came into the bakery one morning, ordered a croissant, and complained it was a crime against butter. I laughed. She raised an eyebrow, then asked, "You cook?" That question turned into weekly lessons in her cluttered kitchen. She taught me how to coax flavor out of the humblest ingredients, how to plan menus that told a story, and, more importantly, how to negotiate without flinching. "Don't lower your price just because they blink slow," she'd say, sliding a plate of perfectly seared duck across the counter. The first year, I catered 2 events. The second year, 12. By year 3, I was booking corporate dinners in glass-walled penthouses, each one paying enough to cover my rent for months. I bought my first small parcel of land outside the city, not for farming, but for storage and a test kitchen. Still, I didn't tell my family. My social media was a scrapbook of neutral sunsets and coffee cups, nothing that hinted at success. I didn't want their approval to feel like a reward. I wanted it to be irrelevant. One rainy afternoon, Evelyn found me staring at a photo of my grandmother, the one who gave me the key, tucked into the corner of my vision board. "Still thinking about them?" she asked. "Not really," I lied. She smirked. "Then why haven't you shown them who you are now?" The truth was I liked the invisibility. It gave me space to grow without their commentary in my ear. But as my client list grew, so did my ambitions. I wanted land, real land. I wanted a farm to supply everything I served, to make my business untouchable. It took another year of 18-hour days, double-booked weekends, and more burnt fingers than I cared to count, but I found it. 50 acres of rolling hills, a weathered barn, a farmhouse with peeling white paint. The address stopped me cold. It was theirs. Only it wasn't anymore. I signed the papers with a steady hand, the brass key heavy in my pocket like it had been waiting for this exact moment. The sky was bruised with late afternoon clouds when I pulled up the long gravel drive. The old maple trees on either side were bare now, their limbs arching like skeletal arms toward the farmhouse. From inside, the faint hum of voices and the clink of silverware spilled out through the screen door. I could smell it before I even stepped onto the porch. Turkey, sage stuffing, sweet potatoes laced with marshmallows. My boots crunched against the gravel, each step deliberate, the chill wind tugging at the hem of my camel coat. I didn't knock. I pushed open the door and walked straight into the dining room. Every head turned. For a beat, no one spoke. My mother's hand froze halfway to the cranberry sauce. My father's knife hovered mid-carve. Cousin Lindsay whispered my name like it was a ghost story. "Rachel." My mother finally breathed. "We didn't know you were coming." "I figured I'd drop by," I said, setting my purse down on the sideboard. My eyes scanned the room, lingering just long enough on the barn through the window. "It's been a while." The silence was thick, broken only by the steady tick of the grandfather clock in the corner. My father cleared his throat. "You should have called first." "Why?" I asked lightly. Would that have changed anything? His mouth tightened. I let the pause stretch, then pulled a thin folder from my bag, embossed with the name of the real estate agency in crisp gold letters. I set it down in the center of the table, right between the gravy boat and the breadbasket. My uncle frowned. "What's this?" I slid the top document toward them, ink still fresh from my morning appointment. "It's the deed," I said, "to this farm, and the 50 acres around it." You could have heard a pin drop. "That's not funny," my cousin Mark muttered. "It's not a joke," I replied, my tone even. "I own it now. Every square foot, from the fence line to the creek, including the house you're eating in." My father's face drained of color. My mother pressed a hand to her chest. "How?" she started, then stopped herself. "How?" I repeated, leaning one hip against the table. "By working. By building something from nothing. By doing exactly what you said I couldn't." My gaze swept over them. The same people who had told me to be realistic while they clung to a farm they could barely keep afloat. "I'm not here to kick you out," I said finally. "Not tonight. I'm here because I wanted you to know, every bite you're taking right now, you're taking on my land." My father's eyes flicked to the window, as if the view could somehow make sense of it. My mother's lips parted, closed, parted again. Evelyn's voice echoed in my memory. "Don't lower your price just because they blink slow." I picked up my purse. "Enjoy your dinner," I said, heading for the door. "You're welcome." Behind me, chairs scraped against the floor, but no one followed. I stepped out into the cold air, the door creaking shut behind me, and stood for a moment on the porch. The barn's paint was peeling worse than I remembered. The wind carried a faint sound of laughter from inside, softer now, uncertain. As I walked back to my car, the brass key in my coat pocket pressed into my palm. This time, it wasn't a reminder to build my own house. It was proof I already had. I didn't expect them to call that night, but they did.
Twice.
I let it go to voicemail both times. By the next morning, there were 3 missed calls and a text from my mother that simply read, "Can we talk?" When I arrived back at the farmhouse later that week, the mood was different. No holiday table, no smell of turkey, just my parents sitting at the kitchen island like a pair of worn-out bookends. My father's elbows rested on the counter, his hands clasped tightly, as if he were holding something together. "We don't want to lose the farm," he said before I'd even taken off my coat. I set my purse down, took a slow breath. "Then you'll need to make some changes." My mother frowned. "Changes?" "Yes," I said. "If I'm going to let you stay here, I'm not going to watch the same patterns repeat themselves. This land is going to work, and so are you." I outlined it plainly. No more debt from unnecessary purchases. Every expense would be approved by me. A working farm plan. We'd bring in livestock, plant seasonal crops, partner with local markets. I had the contacts. They'd have to put in the labor. Education. My father would take the farm management course at the community college. My mother would handle bookkeeping after completing a business basics program. No interference in my business decisions. Ever. My father's jaw tightened at that last one. "So you're the boss now?" I didn't flinch. "I've been a boss for a long time. This is just the first time you've noticed." The silence that followed was heavy, but not hostile. My mother glanced at my father, then nodded. Once. Slowly. "If those are the terms, we'll try." "I don't want try," I said. "I want commitment. I'm giving you the chance to be part of something that can last. If you can't do it, I'll find people who will." Her eyes softened, and for a moment, I saw something like pride flicker there. "You sound like your grandmother." The brass key in my pocket seemed to warm at that. I pushed a folder across the counter. Business plans, crop rotations, revenue projections. "We start Monday," I said. My father looked down at the papers, then back at me. His voice was low, almost grudging. "All right." It wasn't an apology. Not yet. But it was a start. When I stepped back out into the cold, I could almost hear Grandma's voice on the wind. "Build your own house." Only now I was building theirs too, but on my terms. By spring, the farm looked different. Not perfect, but alive. Rows of seedlings pushed through the thawing soil, and the sound of chickens clucking carried across the yard. My father was out by the barn most mornings before sunrise, fixing fences or checking the feed. My mother kept a neat ledger on the kitchen counter, her handwriting smaller but steadier than I remembered. It wasn't just the land changing, it was them. The tension that used to hang in the air between us like smoke began to thin. My father started asking questions about my catering business, real ones, not the polite kind meant to pass time. My mother began calling to share small victories, selling out of eggs at the weekend market, getting the books to balance down to the penny. The first time my father said, "You were right," it was about the soil pH, not my life choices. But it was a start. One afternoon, I stood at the edge of the field, the brass key dangling from my fingers. The ribbon was frayed now, the color almost gone, but the weight of it was the same. I thought about the night my grandmother gave it to me, her quiet voice telling me to build my own house. I had done that. And somehow, in doing it, I'd rebuilt theirs too. When Thanksgiving came around again, the table was full, not just with food, but with something that felt closer to what I used to hope for. I didn't sit there as the forgotten daughter anymore. I sat there as the woman who had turned the key in her own lock. After dinner, I walked out to the barn alone. The night air was crisp, the stars sharp against the dark. I held the key up to the sky, just for a second, then slipped it back into my pocket. I didn't need it to remind me anymore. I was the house now.